Thank you, Andrew, and thank you, Ed, for sharing those fascinating stories. I'm sure there's no lack of topics we can talk about. Before we get into that, I'll start us off here. You know, when I was a child, the Second World War seemed something very far away, ancient history, and as you get older, history kind of comes closer, doesn't it? I'm not sure if you get that feeling. The older you get, history comes closer. Do you have that feeling? And I guess I want to ask in commonality between both of you. What have you learned from your understanding of history by delving into these family aspects?
I wouldn't say that history seems closer by nature. I think you have to go look for it. And in my particular case, I think I needed a certain level of maturity to understand it. Because Polish history, and I would say that part of Europe in general, is quite complex. And you need a certain level of maturity to understand it and to feel it. Like General Williams, I immersed myself in reading a lot about Poland in World War II. But the history really became real and live for me when my father started to open up about it for the very first time in 1994. And I think to underscore the other point that Andrew was making is that as you learn that history, it should be committed somehow. I begged my father for years to try to write it down. He said he wasn't interested, didn't want to, but he eventually did. And when I was visiting him on Thursday, he actually brought it up. He said he's actually glad that he did it. He's actually glad that he did it, and I am too. The other thing that I've learned in terms of, I guess, family and traditions through my personal experiences is probably two things that stand out. And again, I'm going to talk about the Polish people as far as I know them. And that is, Polish people serve Poland, sometimes just by surviving. Just by surviving, that's how the Polish nation can endure. And I've talked about it in my own family, how the 5 people I covered all served Poland in a different way, whether it was with a weapon, whether it was by surviving, whether it was by just maintaining your Polishness. These were all different ways. And I don't think any of them growing up, made a conscious decision to serve Poland. They just did. They just did because the times and the circumstances called for it. And I don't think any one of them would ever call themselves a hero. They just did what they had to do. And then the second thing that I've learned, particularly is, my father and I have grown so close since 1994, is that we should never forget. And I think Andrew talked about that as well. And that forgetting is easy because it's a busy life. There's lots of things going on. And when I started traveling to Poland for the first time in 1996, and I've been going regularly ever since, is that a big part of it is going to the cemeteries. It's remembering our ancestors. It's paying honor, and not just the family members, but the friends of the family too, that went through a lot of these times. And again, and attached to that is, again, when I started traveling to Poland, I was lucky that many of my father's friends were still alive, so to hear their stories, and even though I couldn't understand everything because it was all in Polish, but I knew it meant a lot for them to reminisce together. But again, we don't have enough time to get into the discovery of Hans, but that was an absolutely pivotal moment in my journey of faith. And I think it showed as well that as much as the horrific times that Andrew and I have talked about and how it affected our family, that at least through this one boy, Hans Ott, that you can find good people even among people who are officially your enemies. And that also changed my perspective on life, my perspective on faith. And so I think I've grown as a person in going a step beyond, reading the history, but actually touching it, seeing it, retracing it, meeting the people.
Thanks, Tom and Ed. In terms of, can you hear me?
No.
What? Can you hear me now?
No.
Is that the
It's always the other one here.
Either that or it's sabotage. Okay. Thank you both for the question and the comments. It seems to me that, as I grow older, and I just celebrated my 62nd birthday, I never thought I'd,
You're just a baby.
Yeah, just a baby, but I'm just reminded of that song with the Beatles from the Abbey Road album. And when I'm 64, will you still need me? Well, I'm getting there. Anyway, the thing is that my feelings lately about history as I grow older is, number one, the importance of recording. Important things have to be recorded, whether it's, the family history or, it's nice to say that, there will be some other books, and hopefully, there will be books that cover important things. But in my family, certainly my grandfather's book played a huge role in sort of creating this desire of mine to find out more. And I never met my grandfather, obviously, but while reading his book, I felt he was nearby, and it just, is priceless. The other thing that sort of goes with that is now that I'm in my 60s, I'm increasingly realizing just how quickly history is forgotten. Because, it's not that long ago that I was a kid and things happened that I thought were really important, and nobody who's born after 1990 or 2000 seems to have any idea what I'm talking about. The other day, for example, I was in a store, and in the music that came on was the opening riff of the Rolling Stones' I Can't Get No Satisfaction. And of course, every time that I've heard that song since 1965, I just can't stop dancing. And right away I started to jiggle in the store, and there was this 20-something young lady beside me, and I looked at her and smiled and said, "Isn't that a great song?" And she had no idea what I was talking about. And it made me realize that when I was a kid, my mother just, played endlessly over and over again Chopin. And, my father thought Sinatra was a great singer. And I thought they were both boring. Now I think towards my children that they should think I'm cool because I'm still into the Rolling Stones. But yet kids have heard, their generation have no idea who the Rolling Stones are. So it doesn't take long for really interesting and important things to sort of be taken off the blackboard for the next generation. And I think by recording it and keeping those memories alive, one can have a lot of fun. And I'll give you one example, if I may. I think there were, since at the end of World War II until today, only 2 events in which all of Canada was really united. Only 2 I can think of. One was the end of the war. Everybody in Canada, just like in Europe, was celebrating the end of the war. And the other was September 28th, 1972, when Canada had been playing in the famous first ever best on best Canada-Soviet hockey series. After the first 5 games, Canada had only 1 win, 1 tie. The only way to win the series was to win the last 3 games in Moscow. And we did. We won all 3 games by 1 goal, and each one of those game-winning goals was scored by Paul Henderson, with the last one being with just 34 seconds left. Now, I was 9 years old at the time in grade 5, and I distinctly remember 22 million people in Canada at the time, and 16 million on a Thursday afternoon stopped everything they were doing to watch TV, or in my class's case, it was to listen to the radio. And when the teacher said, the Russians scored, we all went, boo. At the end of the second period, the Soviets were up 5-3. The last 20 minutes of that game were the most nerve-wracking in my life. I still remember it. But after 2 minutes, Phil Esposito scored. After 13 minutes, Ivan Cournoyer scored. And with just 34 seconds left, Paul Henderson scored. When the teacher told us that, we jumped like I've never jumped before or since. And we all cheered. And we were drowned out by the cheers in all the other classes. It was absolutely amazing. But when I talk to young people these days and say, you play hockey? Yeah. You like hockey? Yeah. You like history? Yeah. Do you know about this 1972 series? They know nothing about it. So just recently was the 50th anniversary, and I've got all the books about the series, and I've also got a picture of Paul Henderson right after he scored that goal. I've got that famous iconic picture on my wall, and I've had it there for the past 52 years. But I'm not satisfied with any of the books that have been written about it, and so I wrote one of my own, based on in the format of a dialogue between a grandfather and a grandson, telling him what happened. And then earlier this year, I decided to write a book called Dear Paul Henderson, A Fan's Letters to a Hockey Legend. And in the letters over 50 years, I talk about, the legacy of the series, what happened in his life, the status of Canadian national unity, and of course, the evolution of the Soviet Union and Russia. And I sent it to Paul Henderson. And here's the fun part. He called me back and he said I was blown away and he wanted to meet me. And so last month I went to Toronto and I finally got a chance to meet my boyhood hockey hero. And this is all because of a love of history. And so for me, it was so that's what I think of history these days.
Andrew, just to add to that story, I was talking to some Russians, and they don't remember that series either. Yeah. There's one other common point in your presentations, and that is, you just mentioned that, the importance of documenting. But at the same time, there's a reluctance by some of these people that we try to document from to share their stories. Why is that?
I think the best people to answer that question would be the people that are reluctant. No, seriously, I mean, it's a very, when you think about it, those experiences were intensely personal. And while there may have been some miraculous and some happy episodes, when I think about World War II and what happened to Poland, it was a pretty sad and brutal period. And my sense is that a lot of the people, if they had the opportunity to start life anew, it was really turning over a fresh page and and maybe that's the way they escape with the trauma or suppressed PTSD or whatever, is just try to forget it, put it way back in your mind, move on, pretend it didn't happen. And I picked that a little bit up from my father because, as I say, he was reluctant, and it just took a lot of, I don't want to say pestering, but a lot of, pleading. And I had to be very careful with it because, as I say, I did get, with maturity, you understand how deeply personal this is, and there may be pain points in this. So, but for each person, it's probably different. And the way people deal with trauma and PTSD and all that, for some people, might be to write it out. I think Andrew was just saying about the passing of his father, the way he dealt with the trauma was to write a book about his father, but everybody's different. So I don't think we can put everybody in the same pigeonhole on this. Anyway, that's my view.
I would echo the same comments, and when I was growing up, I often asked my parents, what happened in World War II, especially after I'd see a World War II movie or something like that. And the answer I remember most often hearing was, I'll tell you when you're older, the implication being I was too young. And when the first time I went to Poland in 1974, I was 11 years old. I distinctly remember my relatives talking about, okay, what are they going to show me about Poland? You know, obviously they wanted me to get a flavor of the history and so on. And I remember there being a discussion, and I didn't understand at that time, but only later figured it out. There was a discussion about whether or not to bring me to a place called Oświęcim. I didn't know what that was. Only later did I realize, okay, it's Auschwitz. And the decision was no, not to bring me, because it was too traumatic for a young child. And in fact, when I first then ended up going the first time, because I've been there twice now, the first time to Auschwitz, it was very interesting that the film that was recorded by the liberating so-called Soviet forces was shown at the beginning of the entrance of the museum. However, when I got there, in fact, they canceled it, and they said that it was, or there was a sign that said, no one allowed in under the age of 12, you know? Clearly something that was anticipated to cause nightmares for the rest of their lives for young children. So I think what you said, that those that don't probably speak about it, is because it's just so painful that the risk of reliving the trauma is just too much to bear.
Questions from the audience? Is that microphone working? We'll find out. Supposedly, yes.
No, it's working.
Hello? No? I can speak up.
No, but please press the button because it was replaced.
Hello?
Yes.
It's the lights on.
All right.
Hello?
Yeah, it's
We can hear you.
Oh, okay. So, first off, as someone born in 1999, although I don't listen to Rolling Stones and I have no idea about the hockey game in '72, I understood everything else you were saying. So, don't worry, we're not going to tell you. Second, Ed, I think you mentioned that I think it was your uncle. He was in the Kavchak, right? The 1st Armored Division. Is that the same Kavchak that Stanisław Maciek was leading in Belgium?
Yes, it was the same division. So General Maciek was his ultimate general, but he was many million layers down. And as a division, it consisted of different brigades and battalions. And so my uncle was in a motorized infantry battalion. He was not in a tank, but he was one of the motorized infantry divisions that was part of the armored division.
Oh, that's
One of the infantry battalions, I should say. Yeah.
Did you get a chance to meet with General Maciek as well?
No, I don't believe he ever met with General Maciek, as he likes to say. When he told me it was Pontorozhek, right? Did I say that right? Pontorozhek? I said, oh, you were an officer, and he laughed at me. He says, I was an officer hopeful. So, and then of course, it was on the 16th of August, 1944. It was his first day in combat. He was part of a platoon of 3 Bren gun carriers. They had just taken a position, I guess, and all these troops were pretty green, he and his compatriots. They didn't have much combat experience. So the story he told me is that once they captured this hill, they were pretty happy that they had captured the hill. The Germans had run off the hill. He got out of the Bren gun carrier, and then the Germans started mortar fire on that position, and that's when he got wounded in the legs. And that was the end of the war for him.
Well, thank you, and we learned so much. Thank you so much for your time.
I'd like to thank our speakers, if there are no more questions, for fascinating stories. There's a lot more I want to ask you, but obviously we'll get a chance afterwards or at a later time. So thanks again. I'll pass it over to